Hi, I'm Peter Hill, and this is The D Word, the show where we talk dementia. Good to have your company once again here on The D Word. This week we're going to be talking about dementia coaching with my guest Ethelle Lord, who's been a carer for her late husband, a published author, a board member on the International Caregivers Association, and a dementia coach, who's introduced me to the concept of dementia coaching. So what exactly is a dementia coach?
It's a long study. It's a year or two of study, because you have to know all the conditions that might lead to dementia, and also all possible tools that might help to alleviate the symptoms. Also how to teach others, for example, how to speak Alzheimer's, which is one of the first things that anybody should learn. It's easy to do, but not easy to practice, like everything else. So there's a lot of knowledge, and when I was my program, the curriculum I have is at a master's level. I usually will require a minimum of life coaching certificate, which is also a year to 2 years of study, and in a school or a program for coaching. And if they don't have that, but they have a lot of experience, like nursing or even doctor, then I might accept that, because I know they'll know how to do the research, how to deliver some of the writings that I require in the program. So it's quite advanced.
Yeah, it certainly sounds it. I mean, if I was to come to you with my first visit with you as a dementia coach, what kind of things would you cover there?
Well, I would want to know a little bit about the background, what the information is. If you have a diagnosis for that person that you're looking after, I would want to know what kind of diagnosis they have. I would suggest that you bring all the testing that you may have had from doctors, neurological, whatever. Is a lot of things. Looking into the diet, I want to know if you have prescription drugs involved, for how long. Most of the dementia, Pete, you won't believe this, but most of it, I would estimate at least 80%, is drug-induced. Yes, because drugs are intended to be emergency medicine, and yet they leave you on that for years. And so the brain starts to slow down and tip sideways, and then you develop dementia. So a lot of things are drug-induced. I promote healthier living. As soon as you can, shift from a prescription drug to a herbal preparation or something. So I would refer you to a herbalist or a doctor that practices natural healing. It's just better for the body, and you have a longer and happier life. So I look into everything: the nutrition, the drugs, activities, diagnosis, all those things, and what kind of system is around that person to support them.
Yeah, but the drugs bit interests me. I mean, when you talk about prescription drugs, what kind of things are we talking about?
Anything that alters the brain, whether it's to help you sleep, whether it's to help you to not be depressed, all those things will have, on a long-term basis, will have consequences. And I always recommend to people, look at what the side effects are with that drug. They have to disclose that. And if you look at that, it's at least 100% sure that you will have that side effect, based on the fact that you use it over a long period of time.
That's interesting. Do you think we are, too far down the medical route if we identify an illness, a problem, and the first thing is take this pill instead of looking behind what the causative factors are?
Yes, society in general is looking for a quick fix. And it's been doing that since probably World War II. We've had even in our houses, we have things now that are disposable that were never disposable before. And so we're building a big garbage hill somewhere. We're doing the same thing with humans. We're building a big garbage pile of humans. They're not thinking properly. When I teach at the university, the first thing I teach is critical thinking. The first thing, because people are not used to critical thinking anymore. The second thing I teach is about their personality, because a lot of people have never heard that. So those two things are basic. They're not even there in college students. And those are the young population that's going to take care of you and I.
Yeah, so a sobering thought, I guess, isn't it, really?
Yes, it is. You have to awaken to the facts of life.
Yeah, I suppose he's taking things down to fundamentals, isn't it? You need to look at the person and what's behind the person. And, there are billions of us and we're all different.
That's right. We're all different, but as a young boy, and your parents raising you, they had to follow a certain course to make sure everything was right. You were safe and according to their beliefs and their traditions and so on. But as you grow up, now you're an adult, do you have those values that they instilled in you, or do you make your own because of your experience and your own personality?
Yeah, I guess it's a thinking of myself, it's a mixture of the both, really. It's, the way I was brought up and those values, and with experience as you get older, what you learn along the way and kind of add to the package, if you like.
It adds to the package, and what is it that you would like to set aside because it no longer fits for you? It's not bad, it just does not fit for you.
Yeah, that's interesting because, what you're painting is a constantly changing picture, aren't you?
Yes, you have to be fluid enough to adapt to your environment. It's the same with dementia care, because the person living with dementia, the only difference between that person and you and I is that they process information differently, but they're still human and they still have value and they're still very important. For example, my husband was my own teacher I took a course for 21 years. I have a course in me, probably a doctorate level of dementia care that my husband taught me, because he was also a professor, but every day he would teach me about dementia.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Here on UK Health Radio, where you can listen to a range of great shows covering all areas of health. And there's also some great articles in the monthly Health Triangle magazine. You can find all the details on the website at www.ukhealthradio.com. My guest this week is Ethelle Lord, and we're talking dementia coaching. Sadly, dementia is still subject to stigma, but in Ethelle's view, has the situation improved over the past few years?
I think anybody that's exposed to it, whether they care for someone or whether that person is in their life and they're very close to them, they have shifted their thinking. Not everybody. It's just like autism, if you've never known it, or even if you've lost your wife or husband, if you've never known that, if you've never been widowed, you know about that. You know they grieve, but you really don't know how that is, right? So dementia is a little bit like that. You have to experience it, but once you experience it, you know the value of it, and hopefully you want to adapt. Now, I know a lot of people in my caregiver partnership agreement program. I want to include family caregivers, but there's very few. We're probably 2% to 5% of family caregivers are able to continue in the service of that person. And that's because they deny the situation. Simply deny. My own mother-in-law, my father-in-law had dementia, same as my husband. There were 12 children in that family of my father-in-law, and 8 of them at the time that my father-in-law received the diagnosis, 8 of them had dementia. But my mother-in-law was denying it, and it was 2 years after he died that she said to me, I had no idea that he was that sick. There are a lot of people living in denial, and I'm not saying it's bad, because it's a life skill, life-saving skill. Because as long as they deny it, they don't have to deal with it. They'll deal with it later, but often it's just grief.
Yeah, it's interesting, people's reaction to bad news, as it were. And I guess, that's associated, once you get a diagnosis of dementia, it's how you deal with it, whether, you're right, I've seen people that totally deny it, people that almost embrace it and say, okay, this is what's wrong, what can I do about it?
Exactly.
It's interesting the different responses of people to that situation.
Yes. And it can be a long situation, as we know, decades.
Yeah, you talk to people in terms of diagnosis. It seems very patchwork here in the UK. I hear of people who have been told they've got bipolar, they've got, various things before we actually arrive at the strict diagnosis of dementia. How do you think we can improve getting there quicker to alert people to the condition?
Well, I think doctors, to begin with, have not been trained properly in the sense that they can recognize quickly the symptoms, but it is the role of the doctor to actually eliminate other things first. And so it looks like what you're saying, but what they have to do is eliminate this, that, and obvious things. And then they get to dementia, because that's all that's left. But even when they get to the dementia, they just say your husband or your wife or your sister or brother has dementia or Alzheimer's. They'll say Alzheimer's because they don't know which type of dementia it is. There's over 100 different types, and they'll just say they have that memory loss problem, and you need to go home and take care of that person. They really don't know how to speak to that person either, which would be nice at the very beginning if you receive that diagnosis, that the doctor could relate to you. Because at the beginning, you can understand a lot of things for a long time. You just process that information differently, but that person should be made aware.
Yeah, you do. Think they would be the center of attention in the conversation. I think it's just that, going back to what we were talking about with stigma, etc. Here in the UK, we used to have a radio show which was called "Does He Want Sugar?" and it was based on disability, and it was the fact that a guy in a wheelchair had a carer, his wife, and whenever he went out, someone said, "Does he take sugar? Does he want a cup of tea?" and didn't actually talk to the person. I think that's something, when I first kind of got put in the role of managing activity groups, I was probably in that mindset of how do I talk to someone with dementia?
Yes.
But my solution to the problem was I just stood there, took about 5 minutes and thought, just be yourself.
Yes, be yourself. However, when you ask questions to somebody with dementia, it's important. You ask the right question. Do you want sugar? It's a yes or a no. But if you say, did you have sugar in your coffee this morning or your tea? That's a bad question because it requires thinking, going back into the past, maybe the morning, and remembering. They will not. So all you do is raise their frustration level and make them aware that they're forgetting the most basic things. And then they get perhaps even aggressive, angry, because it's so frustrating. Where is that information? And at the beginning, you hear a lot of people saying, I just lost my train of thought. I don't know what I was talking about. And that's frustrating. So the questions, that's one of the lines. There's only three things in speaking Alzheimer's is the questioning. Questioning, be careful that it does not require thinking. So are you cold? Are you warm? That's a good question. Are you hungry? That's a good question.
Yeah, I guess in a way it's almost like developing another language.
Yes, you speak Alzheimer's. It's like sign language. It's like English, French, Spanish, but it's very easy to learn, except you have to keep practicing it to know it. So that's one of the things that I said a dementia coach would definitely address at the very beginning. Because if you want to be of service to someone living with dementia, and we're all here of service, by the way, we were born to be of service, and so we need to know how do you do that? You're doing a service right now, Pete. Thank you for doing that. I'll do it in sign language. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you. I guess so. You and I both doing a service as are other people. In terms of kind of almost talking dementia, there also you mentioned earlier on in our conversation about how doctors say, "Oh, it's Alzheimer's," because they don't actually realise the number of different types of dementia, all with different symptoms. I have friends living with Lewy body dementia whose short-term memory is pretty good.
Yes.
They don't lose that, but they've got another whole raft of symptoms which are different to someone who has Alzheimer's or vascular dementia or whatever. I guess
the main purpose, Pete, of the diagnosing the proper type of dementia is that you can intervene. So if it's somebody with vascular dementia, as my husband had, then I want to make sure that vascular system is supported well and we avoid building more on it. Instead, we take from it and he can live better. So he lived 21 years and he did have a heat stroke at the end, a year before he died, because the facility where he was, their system was not working well in the summer, and he was a big fellow, and he got very hot and his body overheated, and then but he came out of that, but that was so much of a shock after 21 years of being cared for, or 20 years at that time, that it took his life in the end, a year later. So if you know what it is, like you say, Lewy bodies, you would make sure that you follow that person, because that probably is the most difficult one of all the classifications of dementia that is to deal with, and very painful for the person living with it.
It's always good to hear from you, and you can contact us on social media at Radio TDW on Twitter, the Radio TDW Facebook page, or by email to tdwradio@gmail.com. I'm chatting to dementia coach Ethelle Lord. One thing that some health services find difficult is the variable symptoms associated with different types of dementia, some of which may not include short-term memory loss.
Yes, and when you said the short-term memory is almost intact, if not completely intact, that means you can speak to that person. Would you like sugar in your coffee? Did you have sugar in your coffee or tea? And that person would understand.
Yeah. It's all about these different approaches. I don't really know the answer to the question here in the UK, but how far in terms of medical training do doctors get down the line in terms of dementia? Is it just a case of there's this one, and that one? Or is there a more in-depth training?
That's why the UK needs my system, my program, Pete. I'm not trying to give it to you or force it down your throat. But hey, if you don't know anything about something, you go to the source of the information. Your best source would be a dementia coach. Dementia coach would be able to coach the doctor and the nurses and support them in a team effort. So that's why that program is so important. So the UK could adopt that. UK, Canada, United States, they're all in the same boat. Australia, they're all in the same boat. They're really operating under primitive conditions. It's time that they come out of that. And I like to say it this way: it's time to put a new show on the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Great idea, but I've got to come back with, well, how do we start doing that in terms of? You invite
me to a big conference or 2 or 3 or 4 and let people know about this, because if they don't know, you can't blame them, Yeah. If you don't know, you don't know.
Sure. It's the kind of story of this show, because a lot of the guests that I get on, I try and give that leverage so people do know about them and know the excellent work they're doing. But I guess he's getting in at a higher government level, I guess, to
yes.
to change the program around.
Well, it depends who's at the higher level in government, whether they want efficiency, less cost, or are they just looking after their own self? Are they looking to promote themselves, or are they there to help the society they're serving? And some of them are served themselves before they serve others, which is good in a way, because when you fly, they say put your oxygen on first before you put somebody else's oxygen on. It's similar to that, but I think government needs to be aware of this, Pete. Once they're aware of it, then they can start to promote it. And in the UK, they could start with, like I started with one institution, and it worked. So you start with one if you have to, but really, government, even here at the federal level, needs to be involved in this. It's time that they give us a better option. I don't know if you are afraid, but if you had to go to a long-term care tomorrow, most people are afraid of that thought. They have such a reputation that, and it's true, because when you go in there, the first thing they'll say, we have rules and regulations, and you have to follow them. And those who are really independent people that end up in long-term care are often literally drugged, neglected, in order to bend to the rules and regulations. That's primitive. Let's get out of that. We can do it.
Yeah, it kind of strikes me, it seems such a simple model to me here in the UK, that you get people to go to the memory clinic, as we call it here, they gain a diagnosis, but why don't you then say, here's a dementia coach?
Exactly. Or here's a list of dementia coaches, and here's a list of facilities when you need, because if you live long enough, you will need a facility, because the family is just overwhelmed, burnt out, depressed. So you go into a facility, and that facility, you could say that facility has a dementia coach. If they don't have a dementia coach, don't go there, because they're just going to be primitive.
Yeah, it kind of strikes me, it's frustrating how such a simple model would work, but nobody seems to see it. My own experience with my own mother-in-law was she came out the memory clinic with 2 sheets of paper, which basically said, she's got Alzheimer's. Thank you very much.
That's it.
And even when I approached some mental health professionals, my favourite quote is not a good quote, but they turned around to me and said, well, you work for the Alzheimer's Society, so you must know all about it. And that was all the support we got, literally.
Now, you go to the person who if you had a legal problem, who would you seek? Would you go to the priest, or would you go to your school teacher? Who would you go to if you had a legal problem?
You go to an expert.
Pete, that's the question.
Yeah.
You go to the lawyer.
Yeah.
That's right. You have a toothache. Who do you go to? The gardener? or your auto mechanic? No. So why in such a 55 million people have been diagnosed, but there's at least half of that, if not three-quarters, not diagnosed. And for every person diagnosed, you take 3 people to care for them. That's a lot, 1 million people.
Yeah, it's it's kind of mind-boggling when you get into those types of figures, the finance involved, and it does make me feel that we need somehow to go back to basics.
Yes,
have a blank sheet of paper and say, this is the problem. Where are we going from here?
Yes, just like I have in my. I think I sent you the outline. If not, I'll send it to you. I have it here all marked up, but the very first paragraph, the problem. That's my very first paragraph, the problem.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
My guest this week is Ethelle Lord, and we're talking dementia coaching. Often all the concentration is put on the person with a diagnosis, leading to carers being left out. So giving carers a voice is mainly the job of charities such as the Alzheimer's Society.
Now, the organizations that you mentioned, only one, but like the Alzheimer's Association, they're great for information, but they're not, some of their information is also not appropriate. As I've witnessed myself. So you have to be careful. Like I said, if you have a legal problem, go to a lawyer. If you have a dementia problem, go to the dementia coach. The dementia coach will make sure to relate the information to your doctor, the nurses, and then you get a good system going. Even in home care, my partnership program applies to home care because that's the first long-term care that you will require, which lasts about 4 years. 5 years is long. They start burning out after 5 years, the family, because it's 24/7. I don't know anybody that can do that on a constant basis. You can't do that. So eventually you have to enlarge your team, and then it becomes into, maybe into an institution, maybe even assisted living, which is really good, but you still have to participate in that. The family needs to stay in touch. They're the expert for that person.
Yeah, and I guess while they have the capability, the person concerned is the expert as well, because they can feel and know what they're going through. And I think it just again go back to what we were talking about earlier. It seems a very simple model that you could have someone on tap that you can talk to, that can point you in the right direction. Because one of the other things I've found with carers is they've said to me, there are so many websites, so much information, like anything on the internet, you have to, decide and filter what you can trust and what you can't trust, because there's a lot of misinformation out there and there's a lot of really good information. Yes. When you're cast into the 24/7 role of carer, it's really difficult to filter out what's the good stuff from the bad stuff.
Exactly. And don't forget, you're already overwhelmed with taking care of that person and setting up your own system, because eventually you have to track everything, the food, the medications, the bathing, personal care, all this stuff. You have to track it. You almost become like a nurse after a while. So while you're setting that up, you have to also look at all this information. That's why I created the primer, the Alzheimer's primer or a dementia primer, just to say, hey, do this, that, and that. And then you'll have more information. Here's good books to read so you can get information on this. Because, dementia is very old. It's over 100 years old. More than that even. People didn't know, but it's more than that. It's just that we've been ignoring it. It's time to open our eyes. It's expensive not to open your eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the one good thing for me, perhaps since, my involvement with the show over 3 years, is I do hear more people talking. I see more social media content, and gradually the word is dripping out there, but it does seem to be going at a very slow pace.
Yes, but I regard dementia, I'm not the only one, but I regard dementia as a gift. And I want my next book to talk about that, the gift of dementia, because I just give one example. Now in the UK, you just had a prime minister was there a couple of weeks. Do you think that anybody in their right mind would want to keep up with that? We had President Trump in our country. Do you think anybody in their right mind want to keep up with that? So if you have dementia, that's not important. How lovely can that be? You don't have to worry about the bills. You don't have to worry about anything as long as you have a good care provider.
Yeah, there are so many distractions in life that I think we'd all want to go away from.
Yes.
Most certainly.
Yes.
And I take what you say in the but I guess it's accepting for the person that is living with dementia. It's accepting the new reality, isn't it? In the fact that you move from the old reality to what is the new reality, and the people, my friends that are living with dementia, once they actually make that shift, as they call it, they find it to be quite liberating and, probably the best thing that they've done.
Well, they're at peace. But to get to that point is very tragic and it's very painful, not only for them, but for the person who provides the care, because you see the transition and you pray it goes a little faster so they get out of it. But then once they get to that shift, you pray that they would go back to remembering something. So it's really quite a condition to deal with for everybody. So that's why I think it's so important to start with a good system that will support that person and support you as a caregiver. We haven't talked about the poor caregiver that has to learn all this, make all these changes, and what it means for them. They lose their sleep, they lose their appetite, or they gain appetite. They become depressed or anxious. There's a lot of things, and definitely they form a symbiosis, because you have to really not only provide care for that person, but you have to think for them. So my very first website was Remembering for You, rememberingforyou.com, because my husband would get up in the morning and ask me, well, what am I doing today? And I already had my agenda, but I had to carry his agenda as well. So it's a lot of changes for the care provider as well. It's expensive on both sides, emotionally, physically, psychologically, and that's why the dementia coach is so important.
Yeah, you're almost casting the carer in almost becoming two people. You're managing your own life and you're managing somebody else's as well.
That's the symbiosis, and that's never healthy, but it's necessary when you come to dementia. Necessary.
Absolutely. Well, time's drawing us to a close, sadly, Ethelle. It's been absolutely fascinating. And, I hope that dementia coaching does take off. And, that simple model we were talking about, someone puts it into progress.
It will take off. It's a necessity. I wanted to just add something. The difference between a good caregiver or a carer, a good one that's successful and one that's struggling, the difference is that they can improvise. The good one can improvise. They're good actors. You have to be a good actor in the case of dementia. If you can't do that, you're going to be struggling, and the person you care for is going to be suffering.
Yeah, I think, I always look at it in successful terms in terms of dementia as a team. It's a carer, and the person they're caring for. And I think if you add the role of dementia coach into that team, then you've got a pretty good setup.
Yes, the dementia coach in my program is at the very hub of the wheel. It makes the wheel turn. So it's the most important position if you don't have that. And I know most people don't have that. And so they're failing, throwing good money after bad money. People die before the person with dementia. 20% of them die because they just don't know how to handle that. So the dementia coach would be essential in any program.
Well, I think that's an appropriate place to leave it. Absolutely 100% agree. And, hopefully progress is made in that area. Ethelle, thank you so much for being my guest on the D Word.
Thank you, Pete. I appreciate it. Thank you for the time.
My thanks to Ethelle for introducing the concept of dementia coaching, and hopefully it will become more common. If you want to find out more, then the International Caregivers Association website is at www.internationalcaregiversassociation.com. That's all for another week. Thanks to Angela, our production assistant, and to you for joining me. Next week, my guest will be Dr. Joshua Armstrong from the Alzheimer's Society of Canada. So until then, take care now.